Welcome to this video on the Zenwar channel. My name is Shri Sadguru Buddha Rawa Bhagwan. Today, in the tradition of this channel, just talking to you from my living room, from my couch, surrounded by my art, and talking to you about great secrets of life and creation, as is the way here on the Zenwar channel. So, not here to give you the great secrets that are mine to control forever. Ha 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 ha. But here to give you the truths of light, the truth of love, of God. Just maybe not here to give you my little tricks about how to apply them. So in today's video, we're going to talk about food. Okay? We're going to talk about foodstuffs, food products, food that people consume, food that people eat, food that people absorb, food that people breathe in, food that people swallow, food that people digest, food that people expulse, food that nourishes, food that doesn't nourish, food that is well digested, food that is not well digested, food that causes a problem, food that does not cause a problem, food that is cooked, food that is not cooked, food that is vegetarian, food that is not vegetarian. So as part of my lineage, I am a master of foodstuffs. And as a Shri, I have all the taps, and I've got conserve, and I've got many different Shri applications to foodstuff. Because the Shri is a very important person for a food company, of course. Because in their lineage of Shri, they have Shri professions. And some of them are, for example, cooks and chefs and things like that. And can bless foodstuffs and drink and stuff like that with the light of God, so that it becomes infused and blessed and holy food or a holy drink. And there are different specific vidya, right? You've heard of vidya, visions, experiences, knowledge that comes from the divine to train you in specific fields of power application, right? And there are vidya that the Shri have that make them specialists in some food application. So depending on their Shri lineage, they might have conserve, or they might have wrapper bars and things like that, or they might have beer or soft drinks or coffee or tea or milk, or all these abilities that they have to change and control that substance, including to infuse it with holy power, which makes it more nourishing spiritually and physically, and it provides a long and healthy life when you eat infused food like that, because it is infused by a divine being. So like blessed food, right? So it is actually contains that spiritual light that is put into it, right? And that light comes from God, right? It is the light of God which infuses people, but some people have the ability to channel and control that light in different ways, including to bless food or factories that produce food or different things like that. So a little bit of the same principle as you have some, for example, foodstuffs that have, for example, a kosher sign on them or something like that, where it's been inspected to be producing in a holy way a specific food. Well, in the same way, you have the enchanter, right? The enchanter that can go in, for example, enchant a specific doorway or something like that at a factory, so that all the trucks that go through, as they go through that doorway, right, all the food stuff in them, as it passes through the line of that doorway, becomes infused with the light of God. So it activates all the food that comes out, so that it spiritually provides spiritual sustenance to everybody who takes it. So that means it's very tasty also. That's the effect, it makes it very good, right? So they have the ability to make food taste better, right? To make food more nourishing, to make food more invigorating, energizing, right? And so it becomes the best of that type of food, right? So on the black market, shrees are valuable because they can come and basically enchant specific lines of product of some big companies of food stuff, right, with magic, so that all that food stuff is really, really well received by the people who try it, and love it, and it's a successful product line of a business of food stuff. So the Shree are known for their food stuff and drink stuff lineages and applications, where they can infuse that light, that magical energy of theirs into that food, and do so at different levels, right? You have the different levels of Shri. You have Shri, which are like fledgling Shri, right? Which have been made into Shri, and then you have pure blood Shri, and then different abilities, right? So like the enchanter, which is an enchanter is a magic user, can enchant specific factories and stuff like that. Well, the Shri can do it, but the Shri can do it at the level of different elements of that production line, right? That supply chain, right? The supply chain of that whole product can be shried. Shried is a way of enchanting, right? The Shri enchants by shreeing things, right? So the whole production line can be shried so that it becomes magical and successful, right? Because the Shri can also bring success and things as well, right? So different lineages of Shri have different specializations in the foodstuffs, right? And their mastery of different elements. So master brewer, master chef, all these different things, right? And then you have obviously grandmaster, which is that high level, right? Now you get into the level of the mahashari, right? The mahashari. So different foodstuffs, and the Shri can enchant the foodstuffs, and it can enchant the way that they also nourish, right? Or don't nourish, etc. Right? So the Shri has powers at the level of food stuff and how food is absorbed and energy transfers and all these different things. So on the black market for companies, right, a Shri is very, 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 very useful, especially if you can get a very powerful one, right? Because then now you can create a whole product line, right, which is shried and enchanted, so that all the food stuff that comes out of it is blessed and comes out with the light of God, so that anybody that takes it feels invigorated and wow, that's really good product, And then you got to hold on to your Shri, obviously. You got to keep your Shri so that they keep enchanting the line, the product, and all that. And it's competitive in a world where there's more and more Shri that are made, right? Because more and more are initiated into paramparas and stuff like that, and Shri are made and things like that. But then you have those differentiations between a really beginner level Shri, that was turned, for example, Shri, and then you have, for example, one of those pure blood Shri, who's got these deep lineages, who has, for example, all of those vidyas and those different things at the level of the grandmasters and stuff like that. So foodstuffs, and then that's a whole big play, right? Energy transfers and the light energy of God and the transfer of that to everybody, right? And all the beings that are involved in that chain of transfer of energy. Those are beings that are very valuable on the black market of energy practitioners and magical practitioners. Because when you're involved with the energy transfers and stuff like that, it means you have access to that energy, right? So you're going to be a source of that energy for people, basically. And depending on the level of your power, it depends if you're going to be doing it at a very small level or if you're going to be doing it at a big level, right? Your level of responsibility as a Shri, you know? So as your level of responsibility evolves and changes and you grow, right? You end up overseeing more functions, right? And in the energy distribution networks and different systems like that. So these are one of the things that the Shri can do, right? The Shri have lineages that include professions, right? And these are the specific professions of that lineage, right? So these professions are also defended, right? So they can be used in applications in conflict situations as well, right? These professions are their mastery, right? Which come in the lineage of the Shri. So the Shri gets the means to defend that mastery and defend that lineage, right? As you have to have a moat when you have a business. Well, in that same way, the professions of the Shri lineage have moats, right? Which cannot be taken over by anyone, right? And ramparts and all these different things and weapons and different things like that. So that they are very, 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 they remain relevant and applicable to any situation. But, you could have theoretically in the future a world where you have multiple Shri moving around, and some of them are very popular because they run very, very, very important product lines and things like that. And then you could have some which are just beginner, minor Shri, who don't really have a proper empowerment or application of many vidya. They have just a couple vidya, something like that, 1 vidya, 2 vidya, 3 vidya, 10 vidya, 20 vidya, something very minor, right? And then you have those who are at the higher levels of the Mahashri, right? Who are the great Shri, who are the most powerful magical practitioners of this world, right? So magic applies to food, right? And food it works in different ways, okay? So first of all, there's food that has been magically upgraded by a Shri, okay? Or by an enchanter, right? Who could enchant, for example, a factory or something like that, so that everything that comes out of that factory, as long as the factory keeps its seal on it, right? Everything is empowered with light when it comes out. And this works in different lokas of existence, including the fairy tale lokas. Because there's fairy tale lokas, and these things happen at those levels as well, which are connected to this loka that we experience here. Right? This is just a perception of Maya that we have of many, many different experiences of vibrations meeting in time and space. Right? So basically, food works in different ways, and it's an energy transfer mechanism, and you have different food which holds different levels of energy and holds it in different ways, okay? So you have food which is, for example, grown directly in the earth, directly in the system, grown with light, grown with nature, grown with the function of the system, etc. You have food that comes out of the earth, and then you have food which is an animal that has died, or a being that has died, and you consume the remains of that, right? So there's flesh, right? And then there's vegetarian, basically, and then fruits and all those different things too, right? There's also raw in its initial form, or processed, right? There's processed and there's cooked, right? So there's raw, there's cooked, but there's also processed food, maybe it has been broken up and changed form, changed shape, changed application, right? There's also food that has been cut and food that has not been cut, right? Food that is eaten whole or food that is eaten diced, right? There's food that's been put in conserve or not put in conserve, food that's been put in pickling agent, in vinegar, not in vinegar, etc., etc., etc. There are many, many, many different types of food, okay? But what it comes down to is the food raw or has it been modified? Okay? So there are different ways of using these foods. If you have a raw food, okay, depending on what type of food, it won't last as long as if it is cooked. For example, you have raw flesh. It doesn't last as long as if it's cooked, right? It doesn't stay fresh for edible for as long as than if it's cooked, right? So if it's modified, or for example, you have raw vegetables, they don't last as long as if they're canned or something like that, right? Or if they're put in a preservative or something like that, right? So by modifying food, we can make it last longer, right? And by conserving it in different ways, we can make it last longer. For example, if we put it in the fridge, right? It's no longer in its temperature that it was when it grew, right? And it'll last longer, right? So we can conserve things with modifying them and using technology, right, to make food last longer. But that's not the only thing, okay? Raw food holds more raw energy, right? Because it basically holds the energy that has led to it growing and being existent now in a creation, right? It's life energy. So even a grain of rice or a carrot or a potato, it grew and it holds an energy of everything that it grew into. You know, all the energy it took from the earth, from the energy of the earth, and grew into a food that we can consume, right? So it grows into a receptacle for energy, and its specific energy and shape and taste and all that, right? An expression of energy that can be consumed, given to us by the planet, that we can cultivate also for vegetarian food, right? So that's the best source of energy. That's the rawest form of energy. However, it's also the most wild form of energy, right? Compared to an energy where we put a conserving agent or we put it on the ice, freeze it, do something to modify it before we consume it, right? So when we modify it, we remove a little bit of that capacity of the item to hold the pure light energy, but we can make it last longer at a lower level of energy. Also, the raw food is raw, right? So it is wild. So it is more connected to nature, right? So it is more connected to magic and things like that. So when you take in a raw food, you can have more side effects, right? More different effects that come with that food, a stronger effect. But if you modify it, right, you basically lower that food's ability to hold spiritual ability, to hold magic, to hold that raw energy, and you basically confine that raw energy essentially by cooking it, by conserving it, and all these different things. So you take a raw form of nutrition, which is wild and also unpredictable because it's wild, and you basically cook it, right? Even cooking it, right? Cooking the flesh, not eating it raw, right? Cooking the flesh or cooking the vegetables, not eating them raw, right? Makes it so that you have a control over that food now, right? Because you put your intention and your limitations and your boundaries as you cook that food, or if you bought it, you blessed it before you ate it, right? In your way. So now you have basically established a bubble which contains that raw, unpredictable nature element in that food, which can lead you to sort of sudden fluctuations in how you are in your health and all these different things. So people say eating raw food, natural food is good for your health. It's true, it holds the energy, but it also is much more unstable as energy than cooked food, modified food, canned food, which allows you to maintain a more stable form within yourself. So, advantages to cooked food versus non-cooked food, raw food versus cooked food, and also processed food. So we know processed food, we've done researches in processed food, because the processing isn't done in the right way always, can lead to certain complications, right? Even making the food less healthy, right? So we think that maybe some things that we can do to food, certain ways of treating it, make it less healthy, right? Absolutely, right? So there's that healthy element as well. But we know that cooking food doesn't make it less healthy. We actually cook most of our meat, right? So it doesn't make it less healthy to cook our meat. It actually makes it more healthy because we remove certain bacteria from the meat that can be in the meat if we don't cook it, right? So in that way, we make it more healthy by processing it. We make it more stable, less wild, less raw, right? And it's in that instability, in that rawness, in that unpredictability of it being not cooked, right, which can lead to complications in the individual and in their energy body and their energy pranamakosha, right, their energy body. So advantages of cooking versus not cooking. However, if it's raw, it can hold more energy, right? If it has preservatives, it can hold less energy, but it's more predictable as a food, right, than a raw food. A raw food, you risk getting sick, of getting diseases, of getting bacteria, of getting all these different things. Versus a cooked food is more predictable because you have basically taken that wild element of the food and constrained it in parameters of your cooking, right? Parameters of your programming and application to that food, right? Taking away that what happened to it, what's its history, it's a crazy world, all that stuff, where did it grow, the history of the land, all those stories that go into the food, right? The stories of the land and everything that go into that apple that grew there or something like that. Taking all those stories, all those magical stories, everything, and saying, no, we're putting it in the parameters of this cooking and this boundaries that we put upon it, this conservation method, etc. And this is now the purpose of this food, just to be a receptacle for the light to be transmitted from one place to the other. And all the stories that come with it are not necessary, right? So that's the question of stories, right? Everybody's got stories, everybody's got videos, but knowing to control those stories, control those videos. And the same thing for the stories of nature, right? So many stories of nature, beings of nature, forces of nature, gods, avatars, Buddhas, Shri, free, witches, enchanters, sorcerers, charmers, all these different things, okay? Fairy folk, ogres, giants, it never ends, okay? Vampires, it never ends. So many different stories, okay, and stories of nature and all that. And when you consume food, it comes into you and it mixes with you, and the vibration of that food becomes your life, right? So you can eat it raw and bring in all the stories into you and just raw go through all the stories and things like that. Or you can basically constrain that food through cooking, right? Constrain that energy, control it, control the way it's transferred and conserved, that you will consume it, right? So basically establishing boundaries on the energy that you consume, right? And how it impacts you. So raw food coming from the earth contains stories of the earth, right? Unpredictable stories, magic, all these different things coming from the earth. And when you cook it and when you preserve it in some ways, you can basically put a control over all those stories and basically control its application so that instead of transferring all those stories and all those things too, it transfers now only that nutritional element in food, right? So cooking food is an important thing for humanity, right? We cook a lot of our food, right? But we also eat a lot of vegetables and fruits and raw and stuff like that too, right? So that's all those foods where you have to know that yes, those contain good energy and it's good for health, all those different things, but that's a food that has not been constrained, through a process of transformation. So what you should be at least doing, and is if you're going to be taking in a food that hasn't been processed or any way, the minimum you can do is process it through a prayer, a blessing, something like that, to impose a certain control over that food you're going to be consuming, right, before it gets consumed by you. Because you don't know where it came from, its whole history, its supply chain integrity of that food. Who touched it, who didn't touch it, had bad intentions that they put in that food on purpose or accidentally, all those different things. What is the story of the land in which it grew? What is the story of the gods of the land in which it grew? All these different things. And in a modern world, food is moving across borders, right? There's foods coming from other countries, all these different things, and it's bringing in the stories of those countries into the consumption of that food, because the food grows in the land and takes on the stories of the land and then moves over to other lands. So all the stories are mixing and merging and going in everybody and merging and developing in everybody and being processed in everybody and all the land stories. It's a very complex process. Food and the movement of food and the consumption of food within people. So the Shri become masters of food systems. Okay? They are masters of their lineages that they hold and their professions that they hold in the foodstuffs as chefs and master chefs. So foodstuff move around, right? And the stories move around. And cooking them basically establishes a control over the wild element of those stories and them influencing you when you eat them, right? But also removes some of that nutritional light value energy that's in the food naturally as well. So it's a balance between, being in harmony with nature, but also establishing our control over nature, right? So that's the relationship between uncooked food and cooked food and the balance between the two, but recommended to always at least establish the boundaries at a minimum level, even if you don't cook food. If you're going to eat fruits, vegetables, uncooked things, to at least bless them, right? To transform them in that way with a blessing if you have the ability and power to do so. And a prayer if you're going to go to someone else, another being, to do that for you. So foodstuffs, right? Also, when food is enchanted by a Shri, right? Different types of food hold a different type of energy, right? A Shri can enchant raw food, okay? And it becomes very, very, very potent, right? Like a perishable good that a Shri can enchant. It becomes very powerful and very transformative, because what happens is the energy that the Shri puts, or that the enchanter puts, or because the enchanter gets it from the source of God and the Shri gets it from the empowerment of the Shri. So when those types of beings empower food, that food, when it's consumed by other people, propels them spiritually forward. It's like a spiritual boost. And the purpose of life is spiritual development, Ask a proper Hindu and they'll tell you, the purpose is moksha, right? To develop towards moksha. So when you drink or eat produce produced by Shri, it propels you spiritually because they're more advanced than you spiritually. And depending on the mastery of the Shri and the power of the Shri, that determines the power and purity of that energy that's held in that food stuff that they Shri that production line to, right? So basically that's how it works. So when you have a really powerful Shri, the energy is so pure that it propels everyone and empowers them. It's like a blessed food that everybody can eat, the whole community can eat, etc. And for the Shri, it's a method for him to make a living as well, you know, with his power, and to share his power and his energy with everybody by empowering and blessing all their food and foodstuffs and stuff like that. So not all Shri can do all foodstuffs, you know, depending on what Vidya they have certain specializations. Most Shri would only have like one or two little items that they can enchant, they understand. And going to some of the at the level of the Mahashri, you know, the great Shri, who have all these different lineages, empowerments, you know, in the pure blood Shri, of all the different chains, all the, you know, soft drinks of all the different colors and all these different things, milk, coffee, tea, all the canned conserves. Conserves is a specific specialization of the Shri. If they do conserves, that's a very important one too. And then all these different specializations, right? So the Shri can Shri the whole entire production chain so that it works well, so that it's efficient, so that it's successful, so that it empowers all the food with energy, and all these different things, right? Because the Shri Shri's into the story, right? He writes into the story what's going to happen, right? And depending on the power of the Shri and the radius of the Shri, that determines, you know, what Shri is essentially controlling what area, you know, and everyone falling under God himself, who's also Shri, right? Who's controlling all areas as the system administrator of the story, right? So, and all the different beings that fall under him in the organizational chain of deities and other beings and demons and everything, you know, and humans and all that. So the Shri, right? The Shri have lineages and abilities with regards to food, foodstuffs, and all that. So I've got Master Brewer, I've got Master Chef, you know, and all the different lineages that I can Shri, all the different foodstuffs and drink stuffs and all these different things. The ability to empower factories, so that factories now empower food coming out of them with the light of God and all these different things, right? So, and these come from my Shri lineage, right? Abilities, professions of the Shri lineage, right? So, a little bit of information about foodstuffs, and the Shri can control also, and some Shri can be scary because they can control sometimes also the way that food is absorbed by other people, you know, so they can also have an impact at that level as well, you know. So it's good to, you don't want to piss off a Shri, but it's good to have the Shri on your side, especially if you have a foodstuff company or something like that, because they can really create some really productive food or drink stuff chains, you know, of production, and really empower those so that when those foodstuffs come out of those factories and are in those trucks and all that and make their way to those consumers, the consumers have them and they get a real boost of energy and light and energy that comes to them through that food, right? So whether it be a Shreed chocolate bar or a Shreed soft drink or a Shreed beer or a Shreed milk product or shake or anything like that, or fruit product, or there's also fruit juices. Fruit juices is one of the categories of Shri as well. So you have fruit juices, teas, coffees, milk, soft drinks, and all of these have their vidya. And the Shri that is empowered in that vidya can enchant those production lines, so that they become magically enchanted food and water and drink and all those different things. So thanks for listening to this video on the Zenora channel. Information about the Shri and food stuff and food products. And why Shri are so valued on the black market, because they can really empower and Shri different food stuff and food products in magical ways, right? And after all, magic's still quite mysterious. Thanks for listening.